I have the pleasure of introducing Callee Ackland. Callee Ackland is a zero-waste activist and owner of Bestowed Essentials, a wholesale distributor, online marketplace, and retail store in Rapid City, South Dakota. She also hosts the popular weekly podcast, Hippie Haven, a free resource, on sustainable living travels in the country in her self-converted camper van, and is here with us to give a stunning talk. Can everyone please give Callee Ackland a warm welcome? Good.
All right, so can everybody hear me good? Right here? Cool. So show of hands, who has heard the term zero waste before? Holy crap, okay, most of you, awesome. So, despite what the name suggests, living zero waste doesn't mean that you have to make no trash. In fact, it's impossible to do that in the linear economy that we live in today. So, the goal of the zero waste movement is to do the best you can as often as you can to live your life without harming people, animals, or the planet. And before we get started, I'm going to be throwing out various facts and resources in my speech today. So if you're interested in what I'm talking about, which I hope you are since you're sitting here, be sure to take notes, whether that's with paper or on your phone, so that you can check out these resources later. As he introduced, my name is Callee Ackland. I'm a zero waste activist. I'm the owner of Bestowed Essentials. We've got the first retail store in Rapid City, South Dakota, and we also have an online shop with ethical and eco-friendly home goods that help you reduce your trash and your impact on the planet. If you haven't yet, be sure to check out our booth in the exhibitor hall. We are selling some of our products here. And then I also host the Hippie Haven podcast, a free weekly resource on sustainable living. There is something for everyone on that podcast. I really try to reach people where they're at. So that is a fantastic resource to get started. In addition, I also mentor aspiring zero waste business owners as they start and scale their companies. And I do workshops and speaking engagements such as this while traveling the country in my camper van. So my mission is to empower you to take action. And that's both in your day-to-day routine and on a larger scale of community activism, because I believe that together we can make a difference in saving the planet. And the reason that I'm so passionate about saving the planet is because we're actively destroying it, and it's the only home that we've got. So last year, the United Nations released a 700-page report that says that we now have less than 11 years to make substantial changes to limit the worst effects of global warming. And this report was the conclusion of more than 6,000 scientific publications. It was reviewed by over 1,000 scientists and had contributions from 133 authors. And to summarize it, we must keep global warming to an increase of no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, or we will see unprecedented floods, famine, drought, disease, economic tolls, refugee crises, and more in our lifetimes. And in order to prevent matters from getting much worse than they already are, we have to slash global greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. But to do so requires an extraordinary change in the way that we're living and consuming resources. We've all heard of carbon dioxide. It's the #1 human-produced greenhouse gas, and we're currently spewing 2.4 million pounds of it into the atmosphere every single second. Which means that since I've started talking, an additional 300 million pounds of carbon dioxide is now poisoning the planet. And global warming, it doesn't just make summers hotter. It makes winters colder, and it makes weather overall more volatile and unpredictable. Increased global temperatures means melting glaciers and ice caps, which means rising sea levels, which means flooding in coastal communities. That means that here in Madison and throughout the Midwest, hotter temperatures will decrease crop yields by 25% in the next 30 years. And the Midwest is expected to see the biggest increase in heat-related deaths compared to the rest of the United States. By the end of this century, the Chicago area will be seeing temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit every day for more than 2 months out of the year. And while the end of the century, it seems like a long ways away, it's actually only 80 years. So that means that your children and their children will be seeing the consequences of the climate crisis. And the severe consequences of a climate crisis are not the only thing that we have to worry about. Plastic pollution is also a massive issue that we're currently facing. So we extract crude oil out of the ground, which isn't biodegradable. And it's not like compost. It doesn't break down and turn back into dirt plastic. It actually only breaks down into smaller pieces known as microplastics. 50% of the plastic that we use it a single time and then throw it away, where it sits somewhere on the planet for hundreds of years. And if you're thinking, yeah, but I recycle. The problem is that only 9% of plastic in the world is actually recycled. And even then, it can only be downcycled a couple times before the quality of it is too poor to continue recycling into new materials. So because of our extensive plastic usage, we've got 8 million new pieces of plastic entering the ocean every single day. We've got 1.1 million marine animals and seabirds killed every year from ingesting plastics, and 1 out of 3 fish caught for human consumption contains microplastics in its body. For us here in America, we're consuming an average of 100 pieces of microplastic every day because it's in our food, our water supply, and even in the air that we breathe. And plastic can contain any number of toxic chemicals. One well-known chemical found in most plastic is BPA, which is a known hormone disruptor. And in fact, 92% of Americans over the age of 6 test positive for BPA in their bodies. So we know that we've got a huge problem, and it can feel very, very overwhelming to try to tackle it, especially as one person. But as Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. When you first start paying attention to the amount of trash that you're making, it can be fun to jump right in and start getting rid of all the plastic that's in your home and switching to eco-friendly products. But remember that the most eco-friendly option is to always use what you already have. And I want you to remember that and write it down. Always use what you already have. There are 6 R's that are commonly cited in the zero waste community, and those are to rethink, reduce, reuse, repair, recycle, and rot. So first, rethinking your consumption habits. Think about if you really need to buy something or not. Think about your financial, your wellness, your environmental goals, and if the thing that you're about to buy fits into those goals. Second, reduce the amount that you're using. That might mean using a little less shampoo or soap, not grabbing an entire handful of napkins at the restaurant when you really only need 1 or 2. Just reducing your usage of single-use plastic. Number 3, to reuse or to repurpose. For example, instead of throwing out an old cotton t-shirt, instead you can make kitchen rags, you can make facial rounds, produce bags, even reusable menstrual pads out of an old t-shirt first. And when you've reused and repurposed what you already have, before replacing it with something new, check with your friends and family and see if they have something lying around that you can borrow or swap or just get from them. You can also check out your local Buy Nothing group or Facebook Marketplace, go to the local thrift store to shop secondhand for things before buying new products. I do have a Hippie Haven podcast episode on how to shop secondhand at thrift store and some really great thrifting tips, so you can check that out if you're new to the idea of thrifting. Now, number 4, repairing. When an appliance breaks or your phone screen cracks or a button comes off your shirt, try to repair it first before just tossing it out for a new one. There's an incredible website. It's called iFixit, ifixit.com. There's hundreds of how-to guides on that website for repairing just about everything from your devices to zippers to everything. There's so much stuff there. And I did just do an interview with one of the iFixit team members about planned obsolescence and our right as consumers to repair. That'll be coming out September 4th. So if you're interested in learning more about that topic, I would recommend listening to that episode. Number 5, recycling. And I want you to notice that recycling is number 5 on the list. It wasn't number 1, it wasn't number 2, it wasn't number 3. It's the 5th one on the list. And that's because, as I mentioned earlier, only 9% of the plastic that we're using around the world is actually recycled, and even then it's just downcycled. Paper can also only be recycled a handful of times before the quality is too poor to continue making new materials out of it. Now, glass is iffy. It can be recycled an infinite number of times, but here in the US, unfortunately, only 28% of glass is recycled. And then metal is, in a very, very general term, the best option when it comes for recycling because about half of it does get recycled, but the other half does not. And finally, number 6, rot, which means composting. Preventing food waste is a highly impactful thing that you can do as an individual to reduce your carbon footprint, and you don't have to have a backyard to compost. It can be done indoors. You can get a tumbling composter, or there's bokashi composting, which uses organic enzymes to break down the food scraps. The most affordable option is probably going to be vermicomposting, which is using earthworms to process those food scraps for you, and it can be done indoors. There is, again, another Hippie Haven podcast episode on vermicomposting in particular, if you're interested in learning more about worms, where to get them, how to build a worm box, or just Google whichever compost method sounds best for you and your living situation. Next, we'll get into the specific action steps on how to reduce the amount of trash that you create. So we'll be starting with the big 4, and that's your plastic bags, your plastic bottles, your plastic straws, and your plastic cups. So Americans use 100 billion plastic bags every single year, and it takes 12 million barrels of oil just to create those bags. If you don't already have reusable bags, like I mentioned, you can make your own out of an old shirt instead of buying new ones. And don't forget to think about bringing reusable produce in bulk bags as well. Those are an often overlooked source of single-use plastic, and that's something that you can make yourself. And then around the world, we're using and throwing away 50 billion plastic water bottles every single year. So you likely already have some sort of reusable cup, thermos, water bottle, mug of some sort that you can carry around. Just try to get into the habit of bringing it when you leave the house. If you don't already have something like that in the back of your cupboard, I recommend getting a reusable one and getting in that habit of taking it with you and filling it up with clean water whenever you can. Now with straws, if you don't need a straw, don't use a straw. There are reusable options. There's metal, glass, bamboo, silicone, other ones. But if you don't need to use a straw, just don't. Luckily, when you're at a restaurant or a cafe, it's becoming more and more often that places are doing it like straw upon request or something like that, so you can just make sure you talk to your waiter and just ask for your drink without a straw, because straws are too small to be recycled, and we're using more than 500 million of them every single day, which is crazy. So next up is your paper coffee cups. Those aren't just paper. The paper coffee cups, to protect the liquid inside from spilling out, they contain an interior plastic lining, which means that those coffee cups are very likely impossible to either recycle or compost in your area, unless perhaps they're made out of a compostable plastic lining, but even then you have to have an industrial compost facility that you can take the cup to in order for it to be composted, because it's not going to break down in your home compost pile. So we use 500 billion coffee cups around the world every year, and we could significantly reduce that number if we just start bringing our own reusable coffee cup or mug or thermos to the cafe, or making our coffee at home before we leave the house. And there are often misconceptions that living sustainably takes a lot of time and or costs a lot of money, and it can. If you're doing it in a certain way, it can take a lot of time and money. It does require a significant amount of research when you're trying to find what the best option is. But again, the premise of the zero waste lifestyle is to rethink what you really need, to reduce what you're consuming, and to repair and reuse what you already have. And this is generally how many of our grandparents lived before our culture turned into this convenience, disposable culture that we have today. And this is also how many cultures around the world still live today. And in fact, some of us here, especially if you grew up in a low-income background, we grew up using many of these practices, but likely for frugality instead of for environmental reasons necessarily. So it might feel like you need to go out and buy all new, reusable, sustainable, replace everything that you've got, but that's not the case. Because as I mentioned, the most eco-friendly thing to do is to reuse what you've already got, see what you can repurpose, borrow, buy secondhand, because it's always better to reuse existing resources than to consume new resources. And there's many companies that are jumping on this bandwagon and trying to sell you so-called eco-friendly green products, but if you peek behind the scenes, you might see that they're not so green after all. So a few of the questions that you should be asking before making a purchase, whether it's clothing, food, household goods, etc., you want to ask, what does the supply chain look like? How were the ingredients or materials sourced? Who made it and where? And how far has it traveled to reach you? As much as possible, try to support local businesses. That's really important because local businesses are more likely to utilize and support other local businesses like banks, farms, service providers, etc. Small businesses have a smaller carbon footprint than larger companies. They donate a larger portion of their yearly revenues than large corporations do, and small businesses in America account for 65% of all new jobs in the last 17 years. So it's easy to see the benefits of supporting local businesses all year round and not just one day a year on Small Business Saturday. But living sustainably is about so much more than just the trash that you're making or not making or the products that you're buying or not buying. We have to look beyond our own homes and our own daily routines in order to bring about substantial change. As I said earlier, the world's leading climate scientists have concluded that we have less than 11 years before we pass the point of no return with global warming. Now, to get really in depth into the topic, I highly recommend the book Project Drawdown. It maps, measures, models, and describes the 100 most impactful solutions to global warming. And they also have an interactive website where you can learn more about climate action, and that's www.drawdown.org. Now, preventing food waste is actually the #1 solution to reducing greenhouse gases, because if food waste were its own country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the entire world. Roughly 1/3 of the food produced for human consumption around the world goes to waste, and yet there's more than 1 billion people starving on the planet, and 1 in 7 American children go to bed hungry at night. So, solutions for what you can personally do about food waste. Meal planning, grocery shopping with a list, preparing your food ahead of time, eating your leftovers, cooking smaller portions so that you don't have as many leftovers, composting your food scraps. These are all fantastic tools to be more mindful of the food that you're consuming, because the average American household is wasting 1/3 of the food that they buy. So you can easily save well over $2,000 a year just by reducing the amount of food that you waste. If you know that you'll eat it, buy the final sale about to expire food at the grocery store, even if it's packaged in plastic, because otherwise it's about to be thrown away and end up in a landfill. So if you know that you can incorporate that into your meal plan, or you'll take it home and eat it right away, do so to prevent it from being thrown out and wasted entirely. If you find yourself with extra food, either by happenstance or maybe you're about to leave on vacation, see if any of your friends and family want to take that extra food out of your fridge before you go, or use an app like Olio or Glean to give it away to your neighbors and people in your community, or donate it to your local food pantry if it meets their donation requirements. And be sure to talk to your friends and family about food waste and how they can save money and help the environment by protecting food waste as well. Another thing that Project Drawdown talks about is how it's so important to just talk about the climate crisis in your day-to-day life with your friends and family. Bring it up. Make more people aware about it. That is a highly impactful thing that you can do, is to just talk about it, be the change you want to see in the world, plant that seed in other people to get them and to help them along in their sustainability journey. Now, next up on the list of global warming solutions is eating a plant-based diet. A massive global shift to a primarily plant-based diet is critical because 14% of man-made greenhouse gas emissions every year come from the livestock industry alone. And the speaker before me did an excellent job about talking about a lot of this stuff in the animal agriculture. Eating a plant-based diet is one of the best things that you can ever do in your lifetime for your own health, for the welfare of animals, and for the planet. If you aren't able to go full vegan for whatever reason, still just try to eat as little animal products as possible. But keep in mind, though, that consuming plant foods grown and transported from thousands of miles away from overseas, it isn't sustainable for the planet either. So try, if possible, to eat local, in-season foods. And don't forget to also consider the well-being of the agricultural workers. So if you can, opt for organic and fair trade as well. And can you grow any of your food yourself? Whether that's an herb garden on your kitchen windowsill or a tomato plant hanging in your balcony, being able to grow just some of your own food, it helps supplement your diet, it helps reduce your food budget, reduces your carbon footprint, and it's an incredibly rewarding experience to get your hands dirty and to garden. It's very fun. Next up on solutions for climate change, fast fashion. Fashion is actually pretty terrible for the environment. Every year, we are buying 80 billion new pieces of clothes around the world, and an article of clothing is worn an average of 9 times before it's tossed out. Even if you donate all of your old clothes to a thrift store, they're still throwing away 1 out of every 4 pieces of clothing that they receive because the quality's too poor to let them resell it or recycle it. In fast fashion, the industry is also highly unethical. 1 in 6 people in the world work in the global fashion industry, making as little as $3 a day. So ceasing all new purchases of fast fashion clothing is very important to live a more sustainable lifestyle. Try swapping friends with clothes or shopping secondhand as much as possible. There's the local thrift store. There's a lot of really cool new apps like ThredUp, Poshmark that are available. And if you do need to buy something new, try, if your budget allows it, to support ethical clothing lines as much as possible. And next, rethinking your transportation methods. So, can you walk or bike when going somewhere nearby? Can you take public transportation? Can you carpool with another employee? Can you combine all your errands into 1 day a week? Can you drive to your vacation destination instead of flying? There are some really great calculators online where you can put in your destination and the number of people who will be traveling, and it'll calculate whether it is less carbon emissions to fly versus to travel. You also can put in the type of car that you're driving too, so it can see what your gas mileage is and what kind of gas it's using to get more precise calculations. And finally, one of the most impactful things you can do in your lifetime as an individual is to vote. That includes your school board elections, your city councils, your midterms, and your presidential elections, because the decisions that affect you and your family on a daily basis are made at these lower levels. If you want lower property taxes, if you want more funding for your kids' school, if you want to get the potholes on your street fixed, these are all going to start at your city, county, and state levels, which is why these elections are just as important, if not more important, than the federal presidential elections. The right to vote is a right for a reason, because it's incredibly important to all of us. It's really, really important. That can't be emphasized enough, and that's why we see that right being taken away from people here in the United States. So utilize your right to vote. If you want to see changes happening right here at home, voting for people like your elected legislators, your judges, your sheriffs, these are the people who are deciding and enforcing the rules that you have to abide by on a day-to-day basis in your community. So vote for somebody who will make the things that you want to see happen, or go make it happen yourself as well. Barring a few exceptions, you can run for office, whether that's your city council, your school council, the state senate, or the U.S. Congress, because we need more regular citizens with good intentions representing us. Overall, whether we like it or not, and whether we want it or not, the world around us as we know it is changing, and it's up to us to decide if we're going to evolve along with it. As Mother Teresa said, "I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples."
So have you addressed the population crisis at all?
What do you mean by population crisis?
Too many people in the world, and how it has just tripled and quadrupled, and that by reducing the number of children that you have and also being child-free is just like the number one thing to stop this problem.
Well, it's not the number one thing, but it is up there on the list, absolutely. And if you have the privilege of being able to make choices over your own body and plan your family and plan when or how many kids that you want to have, you should absolutely be utilizing that privilege. I wouldn't say that there is a population crisis necessarily. I think some of the world-leading researchers on the population have said that it's not so much of a problem as we tend to think it is. There is a lot of population population growth in third world countries, yes, but you find that the people living in those countries are contributing to climate change the least and being affected by it the most. It's those of us living in developed countries that are affecting the climate crisis, even though we have the least amount of children. So I do have an episode on my podcast with somebody from Population Connection. She is one of the experts on this topic, and I would definitely recommend listening to that. It's about a 30-minute interview, so there's a lot more than I can say in this, but check that out. And wouldn't call it a crisis, though. I think, like I said, if you have the privilege of being able to choose if you have kids, when you have kids, how many kids, absolutely utilize that. And then it's also important to be fighting for other women around the world to have those rights as well.
What are your thoughts on companies that sell, imperfect produce or whatever? Are they making as big of an impact as they like to make it seem like they are?
It's a great question. I don't think you can group in every single company. It's going to depend on their business model and where they're sourcing that produce from. I know with Imperfect Produce, for example, they do seem to be pretty transparent. They have a lot of information available on their website, and you can call and email, and they'll give you a lot of information too about how they're sourcing their produce, that it's not being taken away from food banks, that they are themselves donating extra food. So I think it's a great idea. It's absolutely a wonderful idea. And if you are looking into buying one of those boxes or supporting one of those businesses, it's one of those things where you'll need to do your research and try to choose a company that's transparent and is willing to show you what they're doing behind the scenes. And that's with any company, not just companies working with, ugly food or anything like that. Any company that you're supporting, you should try to research, see how transparent they are before making purchasing decisions.
Could you say a bit more about the travel decision-making tools that help decide about modes of transportation, say for vacation? And along the same lines, is there a more comprehensive assessment tool to look at your lifestyle and kind of guide which decisions might be most potent in terms of reducing pollution and footprint?
There sure is. Give me 2 seconds to do a Google search because I don't remember the website. I think it's this one. There is a website, I think, if this loads, that lets you put in your lifestyle choices and calculates your carbon footprint. And once you go through, yes, this is the one that I was looking at the other day. So this is carbonfootprint.com. Put in your lifestyle choices, lets you, once you go through the test, shows you your average. It's not going to be 100% perfect, and it's also just going to depend on the average of your lifestyle choices, but it does give you a good estimate, and then it'll graph out areas in which you can improve. It recommends suggestions. There are other calculators more specific for traveling. Don't know them off the top of my head, but that's something that you can Google, like I mentioned, of being able to figure out based on where you're going, how you're traveling, who you're traveling with, what the best mode of transportation is. And of course, maybe considering a travel destination that's closer to home, doing more staycations versus flying around the world and stuff like that. So there's a lot of calculators. They're really getting more in depth with their questions and with their algorithms and being able to figure these things out. So I recommend that everybody does go do one of those calculations and see what areas you can maybe improve in, where you're doing good and can give yourself a pat on the back.
Good afternoon. My question, my son here, he's a teenager, and he's the zero tolerance, like he doesn't use straws, he gets on his friends. Do you have any suggestions or resources, or would you even go to a middle school to make more teens and youngsters more aware and more involved in the whole zero tolerance resource and get them more into, like, his school is very open. They allow them to take time out. They go out in the street and they pick up things. He found a documentary on the straws, which in the plastic, which made me want to cry. But I was just wondering, like, resources to get more of the teens and younger generations involved.
Yeah, on the topic of documentaries, there are so many amazing documentaries out there. What got me started towards zero waste was the documentary A Plastic Ocean. It's available on Netflix and other streaming websites on the internet. And that is, I would say, a teen-friendly, if not a elementary, middle level. They are going to use a little bit of terminology that you might have to, as a parent, explain to them. But that is definitely a younger age-friendly documentary. And there's more out there as well. I would definitely recommend, as a parent, if you have the time and can do the research, get that knowledge, to go to your kid's school, to coordinate with the teacher ahead of time, do a quick 30-minute presentation. You can do it in April when it's around Earth Day. You can do it any time of the year. The planet shouldn't have just 1 month. It's something that we should be worried about every single day, not 1 day a year. But yeah, as a parent, I definitely recommend going and doing that, because then you're not only being able to help your kid plant that seed with your child, but a classroom of 25, 30 other kids as well. Even do a full-on school assembly and talk to hundreds of kids. Yes, I do. So I am available for speaking in schools. But I would definitely see if there's somebody local, because I'm not local to here. So I would recommend seeing if there's anybody local that you could connect with first. Because again, always good to work with your local businesses. And I mean, we're a business too, so connect with local people first.
Do you have specific ideas for schools to reduce food waste or resources?
That's a good question. I haven't been to school in a while.
I'm on a committee in my child's elementary school where we work on ideas, but there seems to be so much red tape, and you can't.
Yeah, I was going to say, how much influence do you have? Because I think
we already cut out straw use.
Good, yeah.
In the cafeteria.
I think a really good place to start with that would be the food supplier for the school district. Where are they getting their food from? How far is it traveling? Is there a supplier closer, nearby, or even just some foods that you can get closer by to reduce that transportation emission? Can you work with the supplier on packaging? So much of packaging and trash happens behind the scenes that we don't ever even see as consumers. It happens upstream in the manufacturing and the transportation process. So that's a good place to start. And then education is so important. So talking to the kids, talking to them about plastic straws, talking to them, you have to break things down based on who you're talking to. So plastic straws in the long run, are they making that huge of an impact? No, plastic straws make up less than 0.2% of the trash that's in the ocean. But for kids, if you talk to them about how plastic straws are hurting turtles are cute, it's something that they care about. So it's a good way to reach them. So doing that education, encouraging parents for kids who bring their own lunches to school, encouraging those parents to package more plastic-free, low-waste meals, and then, if possible, talking to the cafeteria staff too, and just trying to get in there and see what the process is from start to finish to figure out where you can make changes, depending on how much influence you have on that committee.
One of the things we were saying is for the schools, that because we're doing the same thing you is like, remember home ec, have the kids make meals and be more interested. You say a carrot and kid go, ugh, but then they eat my macaroni and cheese, and I tell them that's all you eating is a carrot. So they have more value of different vegetables.
Yes. So it's been shown that to get kids to eat more vegetables, one of the best ways to do that is to have them planting and growing their own vegetables. Having them involved in that process from start to finish really inspires them and changes the way that they're looking at the food on their plate. Obviously, that isn't always possible. If you're living in an apartment, you might not be able to get a full-grown garden. If you can, get a garden done at school, have that be an extracurricular activity, have a school garden on grounds, but that isn't always possible for all schools, especially in the middle of cities and whatnot. So it's always about just doing what you can, where you can, based on your circumstances. Does anybody else have any other questions? Yep.
I saw a recent article online about whether or not the cloth bags that people use to take into the grocery stores are better than plastic. Are the plastic grocery bags recyclable? I guess I hear two different things.
Yes, they are recyclable. Now, are they actually being recycled
Right.
is the question.
Okay.
Not necessarily. There are a lot of large grocery store chains that have plastic shopping bag drop-off bins,
Right.
usually like right inside their front doors or something. But it's also come out quite a bit recently that they're just actually throwing those away and not sending them off to be recycled.
So how do you know? Like, how do you know if they're doing that or not?
You don't always know. Sometimes you can't always find the answer. So, that's where, unfortunately, it shouldn't, but it does fall on the consumer to try to be more conscious and mindful, try to reduce the number of plastic bags that you're using. There are some companies that are actually transparent and will tell you, but I do know that companies like Walmart, Kroger, Target, Safeway have been found to not actually always be sending those bags that they're getting for recycling off to a recycling facility. They have been found to just be throwing them in the dumpster behind. And that's not to say that that is to say that the company is to blame, because the national corporate has a policy, and it's a lot of the times we're seeing like it's store managers who don't want to deal with the process of boxing it up and putting a label on it. It's easier to just toss it in the dumpster, but it still falls on the corporate to better train the managers and the staff at local stores. So. Again, unfortunately, it's just falling on the consumer to do research and
Right.
to take that time to try to figure out what's best available for you.
Okay. So the article that I saw was like, are cloth bags actually better than plastic? Well, yeah, it started out that way, but I think those
Yes and no.
bags have gotten so handed out so much at
Yep.
free, like they just get handed out everywhere, that those are end up in the trash. Like
Yep.
people get so many of them. They're like, well, how many of these can I actually use? I'm just, and they end up tossing so many of those, and those aren't recyclable. They just end up.
Yes.
So that's almost worse. I don't know. What is worse?
It is worse.
Yeah.
To be throwing away those thick plastic bags
Right.
versus the thinner ones because they consumed more resources to be manufactured. So whether or not plastic bags are better than reusable cloth bags, yes and no. It depends on how many times you're reusing your reusable bag.
Right.
So from the start, when you look at just the manufacturing process and the resources involved in creating the bag, single-use plastic bags use less resources to create than a reusable cloth or reusable plastic bag, yes.
Right.
The hope is that you're going to be reusing it. So, for example, with cotton, just plain cotton, not organic cotton bags, you need to reuse it 52 times to make it more sustainable of a choice than a single-use plastic bag. Now, you can do that. If you go to the grocery store once a week for a year, that's 52 uses out of it. Unfortunately, yeah, we are seeing, it's good and bad. We are seeing more reusable bags being just handed out for free. That's awesome. If you maybe can't afford to buy reusable bags, you get one for free. That's great. If you're reusing it, try to refuse it. If you don't need that bag, don't take it. Hand it back. Have it be given to somebody else if you know that you already have enough at home. So reuse your existing reusable bags until they fall apart. Keep reusing them over and over. If you already have enough, don't buy any more. And if you do end up with the odd single-use plastic bag here and there, reuse that as well. Like just because we're calling it single-use doesn't mean that it has to be. They can be reused. Use it as a trash liner, use it for picking up your dog poop, whatever you're doing with it, get a couple more uses out of it to decrease the waste of the resources that went into creating it.
So I've been trying to be more low waste, and I have two spaces in my home that I'm having a harder time with. One is pets, and then my bathroom. So with pets, I have a dog, obviously. I'm trying to balance the idea of using plastic. You can find some dog bags that are supposedly more eco-friendly. I've done a little research saying that maybe those are not, and they're a little bit more expensive. I'm on a budget, so I'm just trying to figure out the best way to care for my dog. Obviously, his dog food comes in a big plastic bag. Those kind of things are slightly out of my control. Or, there are some companies that have more of compostable bags, but then you pay for shipping to get them sent to your house. So it's like this kind of hard situation. And obviously the bathroom is one of those places that I feel like I don't think I'm alone. It's like one of the hardest places to make low to zero waste.
Yeah. So with bathroom, there's a ton of amazing small businesses that are popping up that are selling more low-waste, eco-friendly bathroom beauty kind of products. So those are available. There's also so many DIY recipes. And then to also, number one on that list is to rethink your consumption habits. Do you need whatever your skincare or bathroom routine is? Do you need multiple different products? Can you buy multifunction products that work for multiple things? Buying the largest quantity possible. If you do need to buy something new, buy it in the biggest thing possible. So if you need a certain type of, you have a skin condition, you need some special type of lotion, try to get it in the biggest container. With your pet food, try to buy the pet food in the biggest bag possible, because, it's this large container, this large bag, but it's actually using less resources overall than if you're buying multiple smaller bags or smaller containers. And it takes up less space as well when transporting. I don't have pets, so I don't have a lot of tips on that besides just trying to buy as big as possible, reusing things that you already have for picking up dog poop. If you're needing dog poop bags, try to find the ones that are actually compostable if you have composting available to you. Right. If you don't have composting available and there's a difference between home compostable and industrial compostable, and the product should specify. If it's vague, it's not legitimate. They're just slapping a label on there. They should have had it actually third-party tested to know what the biodegradability process is for their product. So if you're buying something that's compostable, but then you don't have any sort of composting, whether it's home or industrial facilities available to you, and you're putting it in the landfill, it's actually a little bit worse than if you just bought the plastic alternative, because it does most of the time consume more resources to create that special compostable material than it would have to just create the plastic alternative.
Right.
So that's something
what I
else.
found.
Again, it's there's so many things that it falls on us as the consumers to have to think about and research, and that sucks, but it's also the only way that these corporations are going to change their incredibly unethical and unwasteful ways is with consumer demand, because we've seen that these little fees and taxes and fines that they might get put on them by the government aren't enough. They pay it, they have plenty of money, they pay it, they move on, they keep doing what they're doing, they get a little sneakier at hiding what they're doing. It's only with consumer demand that we can really get together and make companies change.
I was going to share that we were at Life Fest this year in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and they had a huge display of how many of those plastic water bottles are discarded. And I really liked what they did. Instead of going on and on about it, they put water, like picnic table type water buckets out there that you could fill up your water bottles with. So it stopped you buying water there.
Yeah, it's really, really helpful to see it. The average American is making 4.6 pounds of trash every single day. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but when you start adding it up, that's like 4 dumpsters worth of trash per person per year. Think about that based on however many years you live in your life, hundreds of dumpsters potentially with you and your family. So it is so helpful to see things, to be able to actually visualize these numbers. I like that idea.
That's a really good point. 2 of the schools that I teach at have added water systems where kids can fill up their water bottles at school, and it keeps track of how many less water bottles are being used right on the bubbler.
Yeah, I know which ones you're talking about. They're becoming more and more common, which is awesome. That seeing that number, seeing it tick up as you fill your water bottle, I think it's a really helpful reminder. Any more questions or comments?
I had one, so that was our next one. So I know a lot of the problems is the trash is ending up somewhere it's not supposed to. Mm-hmm. Is there a problem with maybe, because I know especially with the summer months, maybe starting a bonfire and using something that you could do that to cook something else with it and just kind of setting what you have for trash on fire? Or is that considered problematic with chemicals getting released into the air or something like that?
Very, very problematic with chemicals getting released into the air. Okay, multiple proven negative health effects from burning plastics because of the chemicals that's within them. The best thing is to let your local waste management facilities deal with it. They're trained, they have equipment and machinery, instead of trying to burn trash yourself. It just wouldn't be good for your lungs or your neighbors around you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. But you can always burn wood and paper and that kind of thing, you know, as long as you're doing it in the proper container and keeping an eye on it, and normal fire safety hazards. Paper and wood are usually, and cardboard are good to burn.
So I want to kind of piggyback off the topic of the compostable bags for dogs. And how do you feel about like the greenwashing of some products, like having these compostable cups instead of the traditional plastic ones? Because I don't know if you're talking about it. I was talking with one of the people here. Because it's not using oil as the source to create the product, but I do know what you mentioned is all the other things that go into creating those products. So can you elaborate on those thoughts a little bit?
Yeah, so it's good and bad that we're seeing compostable servingware, cutlery, plates, and that kind of things popping up more and more at restaurants and cafes. It's good that people are becoming more conscious of it, yes. The problem that I see frequently, especially while traveling and getting to visit different towns, is they have these compostable options and they don't have a compost bin. Or if they do, they're not training the employees and keeping an eye on it and putting up signs to help train consumers, and everything's just getting mixed together. What I see is a lot of the times you have these compostable things and they're being put in the trash with everything else. They're going to the landfill, which doesn't have the oxygen required for them to break down. It's not the right circumstances, so it's just as if you just used a normal plastic option. And again, it's even actually a little bit worse because the amount of water and other resources that go into creating compostable products is slightly higher than plastic. And so that, you know, it kind of crosses off the fact that it was compostable if you're not composting it and you're just putting it in the landfill. So it's only if you're actually composting it and it's turning back into nutrient-rich dirt that you are actually getting the more sustainable benefit out of it. So when you see companies, restaurants, cafes doing that, I would definitely recommend if you have an extra 5 minutes to talk to the store manager, to write an email to the owner, ask them, when you are approaching companies, businesses, say thank you for the steps that they've taken. As their customer, applaud them for that first effort, but then ask them what they're going to do next. Are they working on making composting available to the customers? Are they working on a better training program for their employees to make sure that compostables and trash and recycling are all properly separated out from each other and going to the right waste streams? Try to follow up and take that next step to make sure that the intended benefit is actually happening. Check out our podcast too, Hippie Haven Podcast, available on all major podcasting apps. There's any topic that you've been wondering about, it's either there or it's coming very soon. And then feel free to get in touch with me. I'm on Instagram at a hippie in a van. So you can follow me and DM me, say hi, tag me in pictures. Thank you all. I appreciate you guys coming out and listening.